On June 18, 2023, 5 men climbed into a carbon fiber tube smaller than a minivan and prepared to sink 2.5 miles into the darkest part of the Atlantic Ocean. They were going to see the Titanic. Only one of them had made this dive before. Within 2 hours, all communication would stop. And what investigators would eventually piece together wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning that had been ignored for years. This is the story of the Titan submersible and the man who built it. His name was Stockton Rush, a pilot, an engineer, and above all, a believer that the rules holding back deep-sea exploration were outdated. Rush had grown up dreaming of being an astronaut, but poor eyesight closed that door. So he turned his ambition toward the one place on Earth almost as unexplored as space, the bottom of the ocean. In 2009, he co-founded a company called OceanGate with a mission that sounded almost noble: make deep-sea exploration accessible, not just for governments and billionaires with research vessels, but for scientists, filmmakers, and adventurous paying passengers. It was a beautiful idea, but beneath it was a decision that would define everything that followed. Submersibles that carry humans to extreme depths are typically built from titanium or steel, shaped into a perfect sphere. That shape matters. A sphere distributes pressure evenly across its entire surface, which is critical when you're descending into an environment where the water pressure can crush a target with the force of 40 jumbo jets stacked on top of it. Every major submersible operator in the world followed this principle. Every one of them also submitted their vessels for independent classification, a rigorous, expensive, and time-consuming safety certification process done by outside engineering bodies. Stockton Rush chose to do neither. Instead, Titan was built with a cylindrical hull made largely of carbon fiber, a material prized in aviation for being light and strong, but almost never used in deep-sea vessels for a very specific reason. Carbon fiber performs unpredictably under repeated compression. It can develop microscopic fractures invisible to the naked eye, fractures that don't show themselves until it's too late. And when it came to classification, Rush publicly argued that the process was slowing down innovation. In interviews, he described the safety regulations of the maritime industry as a barrier standing between humanity and the ocean's secrets. Several people close to the project didn't share his confidence. In 2018, OceanGate's own director of marine operations wrote an internal report raising alarms about the hull's testing standards and warned that passengers could be at risk during, quote, extreme depth dives. He was fired days later. That same year, a group of more than 36 industry experts, submersible pilots, and deep-sea engineers signed a letter to Rush, warning that OceanGate's experimental approach could lead to catastrophic outcomes. Rush dismissed the concerns as the industry protecting its own interests, threatened by outside innovation. For the next 5 years, Titan dove again and again into the deep Atlantic without a major incident. Each successful trip seemed to validate Rush's instincts. He would tell future passengers something that, in hindsight, feels almost impossible to hear now. He said that at some point, safety is just pure waste. If you want to be safe, he said, don't get out of bed, don't get in your car, don't do anything. But the ocean does not forgive miscalculation. And carbon fiber, unlike steel, does not fail gracefully. It fails suddenly. By 2023, OceanGate was charging around $250,000 per seat for an 8-day expedition, with the centerpiece being a single dive to the wreck of the Titanic, sitting 12,500 feet below the surface. Among those who signed up that June were British billionaire and adventurer Hamish Harding, a man who had already been to space and set world records for polar circumnavigation. Also aboard were Shahzada Dawood, a Pakistani businessman, and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman, who reportedly had reservations about the trip, but decided to go, in part, as a Father's Day gift to his dad. And there was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a legendary French submariner nicknamed Mr. Titanic, who had personally visited the wreck more than 30 times and knew its debris field better than almost anyone alive. At the controls sat Stockton Rush himself. On the morning of June 18th, the Titan was lowered into the water from its support ship roughly 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. The crew sealed themselves inside, bolted shut from the outside, with no possibility of opening the hatch on their own. This was standard for the vessel. Once locked in, they were entirely dependent on the surface crew and the submersible's own systems to bring them home. Titan began its descent, communicating with the surface ship through short text messages relayed via an underwater acoustic system, since radio waves don't travel through water. 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive, the surface crew received a routine message. Titan reported it had dropped 2 weights, a normal part of achieving what's called neutral buoyancy for the final approach to the wreck. Then, silence. At first, this wasn't alarming. Communication dropouts happened on previous dives. The crew waited. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The support ship tried repeatedly to re-establish contact. Nothing came back. As the hours dragged on, a creeping dread set in among the surface team. Submersibles have backup systems specifically designed for moments like this. If Titan had lost power or become entangled, it was built to drop additional weights and float back to the surface on its own, even without any communication at all. Everyone waited for that white and orange hull to break through the waves. It never did. By the time Titan had missed its scheduled resurfacing window, the U.S. Coast Guard was notified, and one of the largest search operations in modern maritime history began to mobilize. Ships, aircraft, and remote-operated vehicles from the United States, Canada, and France converged on a patch of ocean roughly the size of Connecticut. The world was told that the 5 men aboard had a finite oxygen supply, and a countdown began playing out in real time across news broadcasts everywhere. 96 hours. That was the number circulating. 96 hours of breathable air, and the clock was already ticking before anyone even knew something had gone wrong. For 4 days, the story captivated hundreds of millions of people. Underwater microphones reportedly picked up banging sounds at regular intervals, and hope flickered that the crew might be alive, trapped, signaling for rescue. Remote vehicles scoured the debris field around the Titanic wreck itself, an area investigators knew intimately since it was, after all, the exact site the passengers had been traveling to see. And then, on the 4th day, a Canadian aircraft using sonar detected something on the ocean floor. Debris. Scattered across the seabed, roughly 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic itself. The U.S. Navy revealed something that changed the entire story. Days earlier, on the very morning the submersible had gone missing, a classified acoustic detection system used to track submarines had picked up a sound consistent with an implosion at almost the exact time communications with Titan were lost. It hadn't been a slow, silent disappearance. It had been instantaneous. When a vessel implodes at that depth, the pressure is so extreme, more than 5,500 pounds per square inch, that the collapse happens in a fraction of a second, faster than the human nervous system can even register pain. In the most literal sense, the 5 men aboard likely never knew what was happening. The 4-day search, the 96-hour countdown, the banging sounds analysts debated over, all of it had, in truth, been chasing an outcome that had already been decided in an instant, 4 days earlier. The debris confirmed it. Investigators recovered pieces of the hull, including sections showing catastrophic structural failure consistent with an implosion. What they found lines up almost exactly with the warnings issued 5 years earlier by the engineers and experts Rush had dismissed. The carbon fiber hull, subjected to repeated cycles of extreme pressure across dozens of previous dives, had likely developed microscopic damage that built quietly, invisibly, dive after dive, until the material simply could not hold anymore. In the aftermath, investigations by the U.S. Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board began examining not just the wreckage, but the culture inside OceanGate itself. Former employees described a workplace where questioning the safety of the vessel could cost you your job. Engineers who raised concerns were pushed out. Passengers signed waivers acknowledging Titan was an experimental vessel that had not been certified by any independent authority, language some later said they hadn't fully understood the weight of until it was far too late to matter. What makes this story so difficult to sit with isn't just the tragedy itself. It's how avoidable the warnings made it seem, in hindsight. The letter from 38 industry experts in 2018, the fired safety director, the public statements dismissing regulation as an obstacle rather than a safeguard. None of it stopped the dives from continuing for 5 more years. OceanGate suspended all operations permanently in the weeks following the disaster. The story of Titan isn't really about a submarine, or even about the Titanic, the ship it was chasing at the bottom of the ocean. It's about the space between ambition and hubris, and how thin that line can be when the person crossing it is the one holding everyone else's oxygen supply. Stockton Rush wanted to prove that the ocean's depths belong to anyone bold enough to reach for them. In the end, the ocean reminded everyone why those depths had been left to the brave and the careful for so long. Some frontiers, it turns out, don't punish the reckless slowly. They don't give second chances, or warning shots, or moments to turn back. 12,500 feet below the surface, in complete darkness, there is only one rule that has never been broken. The ocean does not negotiate.